Israel and Hamas have been at war for 6 months, and there's still no end in sight to the fighting. But much has changed during this period. When Israel declared war last October, it was responding to a devastating attack by Hamas militants. During that attack, hundreds of Hamas fighters crossed into Israel and killed 1,200 people and took 250 others hostage. At the time, Israel enjoyed broad international support for its war, and the country at home was widely united behind the war effort. But as the fighting has dragged on, that international support has begun to evaporate, and Israel finds itself increasingly isolated. At home, divisions also have begun to emerge. The world has grown increasingly impatient over the slow pace of the Israeli offensive and the heavy toll it has taken on the people of Gaza. Palestinian officials have reported 33,000 people killed, most of them women and children. International aid officials talk about a devastating humanitarian disaster. They say that hunger is widespread and that Gaza faces a real risk of a looming famine in the coming weeks or months. The international anger boiled over this week after an Israeli airstrike killed 7 aid workers who were delivering food to hungry people. Israel says that strike was an accident, but it finds itself increasingly isolated. For the time being, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is vowing to press ahead. He is preparing troops to move into the southern town of Rafah. He says that is the last Hamas stronghold and they must be defeated. But he faces heavy international opposition to this mission. For the time being, he remains committed and says he'll press forward. After an initial period of broad national unity, Israel once again finds itself deeply divided. Much of these divisions have to do with the government's handling of the hostage issue. The fate of these hostages has captured the nation's attention, and their families enjoy widespread public support. Many people feel the government is not doing enough to bring them home. Now, there was a brief ceasefire in November where roughly half of the hostages were released, but over 100 remain in Hamas captivity. Much of the public wants the government to reach a ceasefire immediately to bring home the hostages. They believe the longer these people are in captivity, the less chance they have of coming home safely. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu, for the time being, he says Israel has to march forward with that military offensive. He says he is trying to reach a ceasefire deal, but the only way he can get the hostages free is by increasing and maintaining that military pressure on Hamas. That strategy so far has not borne fruit. Israeli protesters have held a number of demonstrations throughout the war, and these demonstrations appear to be gaining strength. In fact, just this past week, tens of thousands of people gathered here in Jerusalem for the largest anti-government demonstration of the entire war. Now, this does not mean that Prime Minister Netanyahu faces an immediate threat. The only thing that can bring him down is if he loses his parliamentary majority. For the time being, his governing partners remain firmly behind him. In Gaza, meanwhile, Hamas also appears to remain firmly entrenched. The group has suffered heavy losses on the battlefield. Israel estimates it has killed thousands of Hamas fighters. But every time that Israel withdraws from an area of Gaza, Hamas appears to quickly regroup. This has left us with a stalemate of sorts on the battlefield, with Israeli troops inside Gaza carrying out small tactical operations and waiting for instructions on whether to invade that final Hamas stronghold. Even after 6 months of fighting, there is no clear vision for post-war Gaza. Israel wants to maintain an open-ended military presence in Gaza. It says it's willing to work with local partners and the international community on reconstruction, but it wants to continue to have security control over the territory for the open-ended future. The international community, led by the U.S., has a completely different vision. They want to see a full Israeli withdrawal when the fighting ends and moves toward the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. That's something that Israel opposes. Now, clearly, there are vast differences between these sides. That paves the way for even more isolation of Israel and increased tensions with its partners overseas.